Question for everybody. Does anybody think or have a sense that it appears that the world is just generally mad? Anyone? Just like a general air of like, I'm mad and I'm not going to take it anymore. You know? What movie is that? I'm mad as, you know what, and I'm going to take it anymore. What is it? See, people know movies. I like it. It's seemingly a whole lot to be mad about. You can be mad about the way the governments are being run worldwide. You can be really angry with kids. My daughter was awake at 2:30 3 in the morning, and was awake until my alarm went off at 6. So we'll get ready to come to church. So she and I will have fun later, both being overly tired. I don't know if you've ever seen an overly tired toddler before, but I am a lot like them. And she is too, because she's a toddler. You can be really angry about orders. Every time I go through Taco Bell, which is far less than it used to be, we play roulette about whether or not we're going to get the food that we ordered. And we drive back in to make sure that it's correct. I was at Taco Bell in Bloomington when I was in college, and I get the same order every time. So you guys will know. If you're ever somewhere and you go, I wonder if Phil wants Taco Bell, you know exactly what to get me now. I always get the same thing. I get a chicken quesadilla. I get a soft shell taco. And I don't drink Pepsi anymore. I used to get a Pepsi. That was my order, and then a chips and cheese. That was my order every time I go through. Chicken quesadilla, soft shell taco, chips and cheese, Pepsi. And I went through the line, and I pick up my food, and I get home, and I open it in my apartment, and I look, and it's a steak quesadilla. It's a hard shell taco, it's a diet Pepsi, and it was chips with a thing of sour cream. And I hate sour cream. It was the exact opposite of what I ordered. So either my reverso man was in line behind me, my arch nemesis who I never got a chance to meet, or they just Taco Bell'd my order. And Ashley I'm non-confrontational, but Ashley will drive a Blizzard back to Dairy Queen and go, this is not what we ordered. And I'm like, but it's okay, it's a Heath bar. Everybody likes Heath bars. You like gag as you choke down a Heath Blizzard instead of their delicious peanut butter Blizzards. But she'll get more into it. I'm much more passive, but there's a whole lot to be angry about. People mess up your orders at Starbucks. There's just tons of things to be mad about. One of the most recent things that we've seen an uptick in people being upset is actually airline incidents. Did you know that this is a pandemic? This is an endemic. This is a big problem. The average airline incident for the last however many years, if you skip before 2020, so up until 2020, airlines reported an average of 143 altercations on aircraft. That's all aircraft for the entire year, 143. There are more than 143 flights that fly out of the Huntington Municipal Airport on a daily basis, I think. So we're doing pretty good. However, since 2020, average airline incidents reported are now averaging an unruly passenger report rate yearly of 3,715 per year. That is a big uptick. We're a very upset society. It feels like bitterness, or how I tend to think of it, sourness, is something new that we are facing at an exorbitantly extravagant rate, day in and day out. Enough that my parents and I know things we won't talk about with each other because we know it will not lead to pleasant conversations. Bitterness starts out, this sort of sourness that's bubbling, starts out deep inside as a word that we don't like to say too often, but we'll say it here. It starts out as hurt. It starts out as an emotional pain. It's the way that we view intent. It's how we relate to the actions that people have around us. See, when you're hurt, you see things coming as grave injustices towards you. Like I almost said Star Trek, and I almost just offended so many fan bases, it would have been unreal. Star Wars, they say, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering, and suffering leads to the dark side. And we have that here, this hurt And bitterness ultimately lead to anger and resentment when it bubbles over. This bitterness leads to these unruly passengers, people who will drive through a drive-through line again just so they can throw their Starbucks order back at the barista's face because they got it wrong. When you let it fester, what seems to be righteous anger becomes corrosive and sour and destructive. Turn to Hebrews 12. It's a rather short little section we're going to read today. I don't tend to preach topical sermons too often, but here we are talking about bitterness in here. So Hebrews 12, 14 through 15. Let's just read this and stew on it for a second. Hebrews is in the back half of the Bible. Significantly, it's page 2155 in mine, probably not terribly helpful. It's right before James. Hebrews 12, 14 through 15. Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. For without holiness, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble that defiles many. It's interesting that the writer of Hebrews sees this bitterness, this sort of resentment that's bubbling under the surface, and he describes it, he or she describes it as a root. Did you catch that? Let's see that again, just so you can see this. And with no bitter root grows to cause trouble, no bitter root. A majority of oak trees, I like images of things to put this into your brain. A majority of oak trees that grow in the top 18 inches of soil. So when you see a ginormous oak tree, you think about 18 inches down, that's the entire root system for the oak tree, except for the taproot, which goes like 3 to 5 meters underground. But the root system in those first 18 inches will spread 3 to 7 times wider than the widest spread of the branches. So just picture this for a second, put it in your brain. Imagine a giantly huge oak tree. And think about walking from one side of the branches, okay, one side of the branches, and you're going to walk across, and then here's the trunk, hello trunk, and then you get to the other canopy side of it, and then if you just kept going 3 to 7 times farther, you would get to where the roots actually stop, which is somewhere in the hallway in my brain for some reason. It's out there. These root systems, they grow huge. Have you ever tried to actually pull a tree out of the ground? It's hard. When you see those, we had the storms come through, it was June this year, and downtown there was a tree that fell right in between 2 houses, and the root system was taller than the house. Well, that was half of it was crushed on the ground. Big, 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 big. And the writer of Hebrews uses this to describe the spread of bitterness. Don't let this bitterness root and grow outward to be greater than the distance that what the fruit is supposed to cover does. Think about it like an iceberg. This is the classic, it looks bigger than it really is. Everyone's seen that poster like on a school science classroom where there's like the tip of the iceberg and then like all of the other iceberg, and there's some motivational thing like, you don't know what's underneath the surface. Do you know those posters that I'm talking about? Yeah? Good. Think about it. These are just giant things. In other words, what the writer wants us to see here is that you can't really see the deep beneath the surface of what's going on above the surface. You can't see what's really going on underneath the surface of what's visible. And that left unchecked, it'll slowly grow deeper and wider and deeper and wider. And in the case of bitterness, it's like a parasite that eats at the roots and spreads farther than the tree is supposed to. In fact, if you've experienced hurt or disappointment, or you feel like you've been offended, you might not even realize yet that some offense has taken root and begun to spread outward, farther than the trunks, very slowly weaving its way through. I used to drive a trailer for Impact 2018, the camping ministry. So we would get recruited by Shane Hartman, who would teach like an 18-year-old to pull a like 45-foot trailer loaded with 4,000 pounds of kitchen equipment on a highway. We were really safe. And he did a training with all of us. So we would load the trailer, And then he would put like cones at Epworth Forest, and he'd say, I got you to weave out of there, then I need you to back it into this space, and then go that way. And he'd have a whole checklist. Did you tie it down right? Did you check all the locks? Is it pulled this way? Did you hit any cones? We were really good drivers. AJ and I made way too many runs pulling trailers of things for camp. But when you do that, what you start to notice is that your tie-down lessons make you nervous about other people driving trailers around you. You ever been driving on a highway and there's like a minivan pulling a flatbed of concrete, like cement blocks, and there's no tie-down on it, and you're like, I have seen Final Destination, and that movie has scarred me. That's a wreck waiting to happen. And so you very carefully get in the other lane and you like give them the look as you go by, like, what are you doing? The Geo Metro that's pulling like a horse trailer with like a cow on it, you know what I'm talking about? You're like, what are you doing? The ones I still can't drive behind, again, Final Destination, log trailers. If you've seen that movie, I can't do it. I will exit the highway, and I will exit the highway. But you see the Honda Pilot pulling way too much than it should be, and I am physically pained by the poor planning that someone has gone through. Sometimes it's those funny things that take root. I become upset about how other people drive on the highway. My mother watched the movie The Birds growing up, and to this day, she is terrified of birds. Terrified of birds. She would walk, and birds would be 400 feet in front of her, and she would like dive into the closest LS air she could find, either to shop or to get away from the birds. No one knows. Sometimes it's those sorts of things. I don't know why I'm afraid of spiders, but I'm terrified of them. It's taken root. It has become a thing that defines who I am in some way. But sometimes it is life-paralyzing things that take root and lead to bitterness that won't let go. Spouse betrayal, being deceived by a business partner, someone who constantly lies. Bitterness that takes root starts choking out the life that was meant to be vibrant. It's like a blight that infests the root system, spreads farther than the roots, and chokes out the life of the tree. Harboring endless bitterness and holding on to it without wanting to let it go is the equivalent of drinking poison for yourself and hoping that your person who you wish would drink it also drank it with you. It's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. Hebrews 12:15. I just want you to hear this again. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up and cause another to stumble and defile many. The word in there for defile is, we're going to learn Hebrew today, mianio. Everybody give me a mianio. What a great word. Mianio. It's stain, to pollute, to contaminate. This is what he's getting at. The writer here, that your bitterness is going to stain and pollute and contaminate. Our culture today is one that celebrates bitterness and that it should be broadcasted outward. That our offenses should be the national news every single day. That my life is so revolved around this anger and resentment that I feel that I need to invite people in to join me in how frustrated I am about it. Do you remember when Starbucks changed their cups to just having red on them? You would have thought that Starbucks stopped serving coffee. Man, that was national news. Someone was so offended by the red cup that it was CNN did it as like a headline news article. It was like the front page of like the Times in London. It didn't even have anything to do with England, but it was everywhere. We invite people into those offenses. And because of that, we mianio, contaminate and stain what should have been beautiful. Now, here's a word that you haven't used last week, but it's implied in the book of Hebrews here, in the subtext going on behind the text. It's a word you haven't used too often. It's a word called holiness. We've talked about this before. You know this word, holiness? Probably don't use it too often. That's okay. We don't tend to say it too often, other than the old holier than thou that we'll throw out. And this sort of understanding that we have, that it's this sort of being really good, is what holiness is. but it's really not even the truth at all. That's the great grandfather of what's true. It's distantly related. Religious morality, like being morally in some way, is part of what we mean when we say holiness, but the small part that's way down the line that's more truthful is the most important idea. And it's this weird feeling when you encounter something beyond explanation. This is what the Old Testament writers want you to know. So when Moses at the burning bush encounters this thing that he can't explain, this is the holiness of God radiating outward, and it even sort of saturates the ground, so much so that when he gets close, God tells Moses, take off your sandals because there's sheep poop on it, and it can't step into the holiness that has touched the ground. So the holiness is radiated and it's changed something about this space. It's that sensation when you face the absolute smallness of what it is that you are in the whole universe and come face to face with an intimately powerful, exuberantly powerful, intimately personal God. I ironically was watching Instagram Reels this morning because my daughter was awake and I was listening to her yell all morning. We try to let her get her own stuff figured out, so we went in there eventually and rocked her. We are good parents. I just want to get that out there. That sounded like we just leave her in there. She was okay. For everyone watching online, we are good parents. And so I'm scrolling through, and this astronomer comes up, and it's a reel, and he's got a whole picture of the universe. And he said a couple of years ago, the Hubble telescope aimed at a very particular section of space, and he highlights it, goes, it's this section here, and it's completely black. There's nothing there. And he goes, but when they took the picture, it left its shutter open for 2,000 minutes or something to capture as much light as it could on this zoomed in spot. And inside of this completely dark spot that if you held up a tiny little rock up to space 25 meters away from you, so the amount of space that rock would cover in your vision, inside of that, there were 10,000 galaxies. Each one of them consisting of a ginormous number of stars in this tiny little speck of space that you can't even understand. When you realize how teeny tiny you are, and you get that weird feeling in your tummy, that's the encounter of something that is beyond explanation and is holy in some way. You can't explain it. That's that feeling of God sneaking into you. That's holiness. That's what the Old Testament wants you to know. It's the effect that something transcendent and absolutely unbelievable has on your experience. That's the experience the Bible hones in on about what God's character is. And the truth is that when you become aware of that experience, you get asked to join into it. Moses steps into it, and the holiness radiates on you. So a life walking in and among with God is supposed to change you and bring you into this sort of unexplainable, unimaginable thing. It seems from Moses that this story is about a God who plants himself in the middle of all of the junk that we have going on and tells us, shape up so that you can expand into my presence and become a part, a reflection of what is beautiful and happening here. That what you are, what you exuberate, what comes off of you, it's hard for people to explain why you are the way that you are. The prophets speak about a God that shows people in their experience of being close to the Holy One. These prophets, and they try to make this gap clear. This is God, this is you. Let's shrink the distance so that you can radiate and you become unexplainable as the holiness of God radiates off of you. That's God's long-term plan, that in God's space would come close to us, overwhelm us, and redeem and restore us so that we look unexplainable to people. That God bursts out of his holy space into ours, transforms, heals. And that's exactly where Jesus fits into the Bible. He's come in so we can have this direct relationship and live into this holy calling that we were created for. In Ezekiel 47, so everyone, Ezekiel, if you can find it before me, there's a mint in my office. I'll give it to you. I already found it. I went. I cheated though. So Ezekiel's in the prophets. So if you just go to the Old Testament and flip around, it's after Daniel. It's page 1405 in my Bible. In this section here, I'm just going to read it for you, and then we're going to break this down. The man brought me back to the entrance to the temple, and I saw water coming out from under the threshold of the temple towards the east, for the temple faced east. And the water was coming down from under the south side of the temple, the south side of the altar. And then he brought me out through the north gate and led me around to the outside of the outer gate facing east, and water was trickling from the south side. And he went eastward with a measuring line in his hand, and he measured off 1,000 cubits. And he led me to the water that was ankle deep, and he measured off another 1,000, and he led me water that was up to my waist. And he measured another 1,000, and the water was so I couldn't even cross, because the water had risen and was deep enough to swim, a river that no one would cross. And he asked me, "Do you see this?" And he led me back to the bank of the river, and when I arrived, I saw a great number of trees on either side. And he said, "The water flows towards the eastern region and goes down to Arabia, and it enters the Dead Sea. When it empties into the sea, the salty water becomes fresh. Swarms of living creatures live wherever the water flows, and there'll be large numbers of fish, because this water flows there and makes the salt so fresh. So where the water and everything will live. Fishermen will stand along the shore, and they'll spread their nets. Fish of many kinds. But the swamps and marshes will not become fresh, they will be left for the salt. Fruit trees of all kinds will grow on the banks of both rivers. Their leaves will not wither, there will be fruit that will not fail. Every month they will bear fruit, because the water from the sanctuary flows to them. Their fruit will serve for food, and their leaves for healing." So other than a temple having a horrible plumbing nightmare of water spilling out from everywhere, Ezekiel is telling us this image of the holiness of God spreading out from the altar of the temple and flowing and creating life everywhere it touches. What was salty and uninhabitable for life suddenly becomes vibrant and things flourish. Where there was sand and inability to grow, suddenly trees are springing up. The thing that we see in the subtext of Hebrews, we get to this idea of this dichotomy between two things. That bitterness and hatred and holiness, the holiness of God, they cannot coexist together. They cannot coexist. It's not possible. When we invite people into our bitterness, when we invite people into the things that we harbor deep, that we let spread farther than our good fruit, it does nothing but present a large stumbling block for someone who is truly trying to see the holiness of God radiate from you. They cannot live together. One drop of bitter destroys an entire group trying to be holy. One drop of bitter divides a family. One drop of bitter ruins marriages. One drop of bitter ends business partnerships. They can't coexist. So the question becomes, because we always like to have questions with answers, how do you kill the root of bitterness? That's all well and good, Phil. So I'm a bitter person? I'll always be bitter. How do we get past that? That we let the holiness come out. You got to push the bitterness aside to let God's holiness back in. First thing, you have to expose the object of your bitterness. Ephesians 5. So we're going to go backwards a little bit. Galatians and Ephesians. 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, and Ephesians. Ephesians 5. It is page 2055 in my Bible. All right, 5:11, here we go. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Interesting. I love when the Bible just tells us stuff that we ask questions and it's there. How do you get rid of the bitterness? You expose the object of bitterness. Have you actually gone to a place where you call out why you are chronically paralyzed by a wound or by this world? Seriously. That's step one. Name it. You got to say it out loud. As long as you harbor it deep, you can't let it go. If you're bitter at God because you lost someone to an illness, you're bitter at your older sibling because they seem they can never do anything wrong and have made it hard for you to look like you know what you're doing. The coworker who got promoted in front of you, the woman who's now maybe dating your ex, the spouse who doesn't acknowledge you like you had always hoped they would continue to do. You can't let go of bitterness until you're willing to admit what it is that makes you feel that way. And when you start praying and you start opening up as to why you're bitter, the discovery for it might surprise you, because the other things that bitterness has attached itself to will come out with it. This is a dead serious plug. I am very serious about this. It is something I am highly passionate about. Elena will know in a half a second what I'm just because you'll know. I'm not like wrapping you into my sermon suddenly, but it'll make sense in a half a second. I'm dead serious about this. There is a massive problem in our society of not taking care of our mental health. This is that. It's a massive problem that we just ignore, that we deal with things and we never talk with them out anywhere. Get help. Call someone. Talk. Get help. It's okay. That's my plug. Her mom works in mental health counseling. It's okay to say, I am not in a good place. I am angry, and I don't even know why. Honesty and openness help uncover those things. Talk it out. With whom or with what are you bitter? We live in a weird upside-down kingdom in Jesus' world, where he's in charge and everything is topsy-turvy from what we would expect. Jesus models this and the life that God's words teaches us to live in the exact opposite of the way that human nature and culture tells us to live. Think about it, just a couple examples. If you want to be great, you have to be least. So if you want to be the first, you need to be last. If someone slaps you across the face, what do? To give them the other cheek, right? If someone takes your coat, you give them your underwear. That's the actual translation there. You give them your underwear too. If they tell you to go 1 mile, you go 2 miles. It's completely upside down. How do you kill bitterness? The world would be like, by being more angry at them. But God says no, with love. Because they're opposites. They cannot survive in each other's presence. The only way to get rid of bitterness is to truly talk it out, be honest, and love what made you angry. Isn't that a tough thing? I'm saying this isn't easy. People get into Christianity and they're like, this seems like the easy road. Guys, this is not the easy road. Telling people you got to love your worst enemy, that's in the Bible. Love the one who persecutes you. For it's easy to love your enemies, even the Gentiles and the non-believers do that. Or it's easy to love your people who love you, even the non-believers do that. It's in there. Think about that forgiveness cycle. You've been forgiven, something amazing. You don't deserve it. It's undeserved forgiveness from God. We just don't deserve it. Immensely powerful, intimately personal. We can't even comprehend how holy it is, but for some reason, we have been loved by something that we don't deserve, and we begin to radiate that out. We should have profound gratitude. Forgiveness should lead to unbelievable, profound gratitude, which means we should be way more accepting of others, and we should overflow love like the water flowing out of the temple. But one seed of bitterness roots itself somewhere in there, and it kills everything down the line. A little bit of bitterness at the profound gratitude, and suddenly you're not as accepting of others. And maybe the overflowing gratitude is more like throwing Starbucks drinks at baristas' faces. Everything feels impossible down the line of forgiveness, gratitude, acceptance, and love when it doesn't flow out of a place of grace, but when it flows out of a place of bitterness. Talk it out, get help, be honest, forgive, and love. That's how you do it. Some people, when I was prepping this, one of the things said, someone in there will be thinking, yeah, but Jesus flipped over temple tables. It's okay to be a little righteously angry. Jesus turned over tables, let me count it. How many times here? 1 time. Every other time in his 1,277 days of his public ministry, he was an instrument of peace, a healer of the sick, a friend to the foreigner, and a forgiver of people who were sinners, a lover of the outcast, and forgiver of those who persecute them. Famously, the words on the cross, Father, forgive them. You got to give up your claim to revenge and blame, and you got to bless your offender. One of the reasons we struggle with allowing a root of bitterness to grow is because we go through this idea of comparison. We compare what we've done with what other people have done. The only way to get past that, and the only thing that matters here, when I was in band, my band director was a trombone player, and he would say this to trombone players all the time, and he would say it to me a lot, and you'll figure out why in a second. He would say, Phil, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. That's it. Everywhere else, it doesn't matter. A millimeter off in any direction of what we're called to with holiness might as well be a mile. Because a millimeter off still needs the blood and grace of Christ in our life. And when you realize how greatly you have been forgiven, it seems ridiculous to compare and withhold it from somebody else. Stamp out the root of bitterness. Talk it out. Get help. Be honest. Cancel their debt, and let water of God's grace flow from out of you day in and day out. God, this morning